Hey, Holy Cross! It's time for another edition of Bedtime Stories with Bedtime Bible Stories with Pastor. Got to get that out. We've all heard of people that have gotten their 15 minutes of fame. That is, people who were just common, ordinary, run-of-the-mill, everyday people, and whatever the reason may be, not with their desire for it, but they were thrust into the limelight. They became heroes. They became famous. Not forever, but for a short period of time, that 15 minutes of fame. And when it's all over with, we always say, well, your 15 minutes is up. Well, tonight's Bible study, our Bible story person, is a young Jewish woman who found her 15 minutes of fame unwillingly. It's the story of a young Jewish girl named Esther. One of the books of the Old Testament is named for her and tells her story. Esther was a cousin to a man named Mordecai. Esther's mother and father had died when she was a very little girl. And Mordecai, her cousin, was the nearest relative to take care of her. And so he raised her as if she was his own daughter. And they were Jews living in the Persian kingdom, in the capital city of Susa. They were Jews that, when the Babylonian captivity was over with, did not return back to the Jewish homeland of Israel. They stayed put. Well, that's the beginning of the story. The king of Persia, a man by the name of Xerxes, was married to a woman named Vashti. She was his queen. And they threw a series of celebrations and parties, separately, of course. And Xerxes, on one of the parties, had way too much to drink, and apparently had got into a discussion with his noblemen and all of those that he invited into the party as to who was one of the most beautiful women in all of the land. And Xerxes thought for sure it would be his wife. And so he moved to have his wife brought from her party to his party that he might show her off to all who were there. Well, Queen Vashti was not about to be put on display like a piece of meat. And so she said, "No, I will not come." And this displeased Xerxes greatly, so much so that he divorced her. He put her away. She was no longer the queen. She no longer lived in the palace. She was disowned by him. As time went by, Xerxes' advisors advised him to find a new queen. And Xerxes' plan of attack was, let's round up all of the most beautiful virgins in the nation that we can find, and I'll select one to be my queen. Well, whether it was willing or not willing, we don't really know. It seems as though from the storyline out of the scriptures that whether she wanted to or not, Esther was very, very beautiful, and she was selected to be one of the contestants, so to speak. She was placed with all of the other virgins, all of the other young, beautiful women throughout the land, and they were trained on how to be a queen, how to act in front of the king, and how a protocol worked, and how to live that kind of a life. And of all of the women, it was Esther that the king found a relationship with. Something drew him to her. There was something about her modesty, her humility, her pleasantness, her servant attitude. And so she was the one that was selected to be the new queen, to be the wife of the king of the Persian kingdom. Well, as she was queen, it just sort of fell into place that her uncle, her Mordecai, also became one of the, quote, men of the gate. People who were sort of in the loop as to what the king was up to. Somebody people could come to and not just ask questions about what was going on, but throw out advice or seek advice or make criticisms or whatever so that the king could be in the loop. Mordecai found out about a plot to kill the king. He passed it on to Esther, and Esther passed it on to the king. And the king was ever so grateful to Mordecai. As time went by, Mordecai increased in his stature. But he tangled with the man who was the supervisor, who was over all of the the men of the gate. This man, his name was Haman. He thought because he was the supervisor, he was the kingpin of the men of the gate, that they should bow down to him every day. Well, Mordecai was not about to bow down to him. The only person he would bow down to would be the king and to the Lord. Well, this displeased Haman greatly. He took it as a great affront. And his hatred for Mordecai and for the Jewish people just grew in its intensity, to the point where Haman devised a plot to kill all of the Jews. Mordecai found out about the plot. He passed the information on to Esther. And Esther's response to Mordecai was, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And Mordecai's response back to Esther was this: "Look, you have to go to the king. Don't think that because you're his wife you will be spared. You're a Jew. He's already given the order to allow the Jewish people to be exterminated. So don't think that you will escape. You and your family will be killed. And if you don't take up this delivery of the information to the king and destroy this plot, somewhere else the Lord will raise up another person to do it one way or another." Esther said, "Well, pray for me. Fast for 3 days that I might prepare to go to the king, because you can only come to the king if you're invited, and it's been over 30 days since I've been asked to be in his presence. And if I should go to him, and he doesn't hold out to me the scepter to come and see him, then by law I must be killed." Mordecai's response was, "We'll pray for you. We'll fast for you. But also remember this. Perhaps this is why you have been brought to this place at this time in this royal position, to save your people." Esther took those words under advisement. And when the 3 days were up, she told Mordecai, "I will go to the king. If I live, I live. If I die, I die." She went to the king. She advised the king of the plot, and the plot was overthrown. The Jews were once again a safe people. God had delivered his people yet again. God always delivers his people from those things that would hurt or harm them. We can think back to the book of Genesis with Joseph, a Jewish man who found himself in a position of great power in Egypt, all that he might feed his family back in the promised land during years of famine, so that the nation from which the Savior of the world would come would not die out. And once again we see it here with Esther. But those deliverances were temporary. They were just for the moment. There was a deliverance yet to come, a deliverance that would be for all of eternity, a deliverance that we're celebrating right now as Christians over the next 7 weeks for the season called Easter. Our deliverance by the man Jesus, the God-man Jesus, the Son of God, delivering us from sin, from death, and from the devil, that we might have a new lease on life in him, not just for time, but for all of eternity. That we might have the victory over sin, death, and the devil, that death for us would be simply the doorway, the gateway into glory forever and ever. But there's also something else. When God delivers his people, he always picks people, he always chooses people, always uses people that would be the last ones you would figure would turn into heroes, that would turn into deliverers. That's where the 15 minutes of fame comes in. Who would have thought that a young, arrogant, sassy little boy by the name of Joseph would deliver God's people? Who thought that a little no-account Jewish girl who was very, very pretty would wind up delivering the Jewish people? Nobody counted Jesus as the Savior of the world. They all figured he's a carpenter's son. He's from Nazareth. Can anything good come from Nazareth? But yet God used them all. And God uses you and me all of the time. We're finding that out right now. The ones that are on the front lines of this pandemic aren't the doctors that perform the heroic surgeries, the heart surgeries and the exploratory surgeries that break new ground for medical breakthroughs. No, it's the nurses, it's the lab technicians, it's the cleaners of the hospital rooms. It's all of the support personnel that are right there in the front lines caring for all of the patients. And it's the people working at the grocery stores, working overtime, days and days without time off to make sure that the shelves are stocked with food every day, and putting up with us as we come into the store and run up and down the aisles and grab as much as we can, and on our way we go. And even some of those grocery store workers are young kids in high school and in college, ones that figured it's just a grocery store job. It's no big deal. But here they are, for you and me, heroes. And what about the truck drivers or all of the other people out there that are in essential businesses keeping our lives going while we're staying safely at home? I can't help but think of those words of Mordecai to Esther think about where you are and how you got there, and how God has given you an opportunity to serve him in his kingdom and do great and wonderful things in his name. How often has God put you and me into positions to serve him in his kingdom, to do great and wonderful things and touch the lives of other people? May we be like Esther. May we be like Mordecai. And may, through our eyes of faith, may we see those windows of opportunity that God gives us. And may we gladly, willingly, not worry about the 15 minutes of fame, but simply, in faith, gladly and willingly go and do what God has called us to do and carry out his will. Well, that's the Bible story for tonight. I'll have another one for you this coming Friday night at 8:30. So, as I always say to you each time we meet, the Lord guide you waking and guard you sleeping, that awake you may watch with Christ, and asleep you may rest in peace. Nighty-night, Holy Cross.